Hi.
Hi.
Welcome back to Brainworms. Today is episode 4. Hey, Joe.
Hi.
How's it going?
It's going all right.
Yeah.
As well as it can be.
The world's been pretty crazy lately.
Extra crazy. As you may be able to tell, the topics of today's episode have a certain theme.
They do. I think we wanted for this episode to be pretty intentional. So this week we decided to talk about immigrant rights for obvious reasons. Unless you live under a rock, you may have heard that there have been ICE raids throughout the country. And I'm pretty sure the 5 people that listen to this podcast know that we are very much against that. And we're deeply saddened by the fact that this is even happening. We don't really have a platform yet. We are manifesting it. But with the little bit of platform that we are building by having this podcast, I do think it's important that we say that.
What we've been going through is the first few months of a fascist takeover of the United States. And it's not like the country's been perfect or without criticism before this, but we've gone over the edge.
We know things are pretty bad right now. The world is pretty dark. But if you have made your way here to our little corner of the internet, we hope that you enjoy this episode and you enjoy learning about today's topics. So today, I get to go first.
What's your topic?
So in today's episode, I'm going to deep dive into one of the most important and somewhat controversial labor programs in U.S. history, the Bracero program. I actually have a personal connection to this program since my grandpa on my mom's side came to the U.S. through the Bracero program. It's something that I found out about not that long ago, and my grandpa's he passed about 10 years ago, and I didn't know about it when he was alive, and I wish that I had so that I could have asked him questions. But yeah, like I said, I learned about it recently, and that kind of inspired me to talk about this because my grandpa is basically the reason I am in the U.S. today, and so this episode goes out to him and all the immigrants, especially those like him that literally built this country. So, the Bracero program lasted from 1942 to 1964, and it allowed millions of Mexican workers to come to the United States temporarily to work in agriculture and railroads. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. While it helped meet labor demands during World War II, it also raised important questions about workers' rights and immigration policies. Today, I'll talk about the program's origin, what life was like for the workers, and the impacts that the program had on U.S. history, and why it still matters today. So first, I wanted to start out with some historical context that led up to the birth of the Bracero program. Let's take it back to the 1940s. The United States was in the middle of World War II, and millions of American workers had gone off to fight. At the same time, the demand for farm produce and infrastructure support was higher than ever. With U.S. agriculture production being vital to the war effort, American farmers were left facing a severe shortage of workers. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience. The labor gap threatened to disrupt the entire economy. At the same time, immigration restrictions were in place, and many American workers were unwilling to take up the kinds of farm labor jobs that were needed at the time. The solution? Bringing in foreign workers to fill in the group.
Sounds familiar.
So this is where Mexico comes into play. Mexico had an existing pattern of labor migration to the U.S., so it wasn't really a stretch to think about bringing in workers from south of the border. The U.S. and Mexico had a complicated history when it came to labor, but by 1942, both countries saw the need to formalize a labor agreement in order to secure workers for U.S. agriculture and infrastructure while addressing political sensitivities about immigration. And this is where the Bracero program was born. In 1942, the U.S. and Mexico signed the Mexican Farm Labor Agreement, also known as the Bracero Agreement. This formalized the process by which Mexican workers known as braceros would be brought into the U.S. to work temporarily in agriculture and railroad projects.
What does the word bracero mean?
So, bracero comes from the Spanish term meaning manual labor. So, I do think it comes from like brazos or like hands, manual labor, something like that. So, the Bracero Agreement set out basic rules to protect the braceros, such as providing transportation to and from the U.S., ensuring they were paid at least minimum wages, and guaranteeing basic living conditions. However, as we'll see later, many of these protections weren't always enforced. So now I'll talk a little bit about how the program was implemented. It was rolled out in phases, with workers first coming in to fill labor shortages in agriculture. And then the program was initially intended to last only as long as the war, but it was extended for another 2 decades. Braceros worked in crops like cotton, fruits, and vegetables. Eventually, like I mentioned before, they also worked on railroad construction and maintenance. Okay, so now we'll talk a little bit about what life for braceros was like. I mentioned earlier that the Bracero program promised, decent wages and housing and all of the good things. But the reality was that for many of the workers, it was not that. It was less than ideal. We'll just say that. For one, the wages were often lower than promised. Many of them found themselves working long hours for less pay than was agreed upon. Housing was often overcrowded and unsanitary. While the program stipulated that workers should have access to medical care, this was frequently neglected, and there were widespread reports of poor living conditions. Also, to add insult to injury, as people say, employers frequently violated the terms of their agreement. So some employers kept workers' paychecks or just didn't provide them with the promised transportation back to Mexico. The braceros didn't really have legal protections accessible to them. And they also couldn't join unions, which meant that they were very vulnerable to being exploited and couldn't really do much about it. On the flip side, on the other side of the coin or whatever, the Bracero program also sparked tensions within the U.S. labor unions. Many American workers felt that the influx of cheaper labor from Mexico was undermining their wages and job security. So this led to complaints that the braceros were being used as a tool to break the labor strikes and prevent unionization efforts. Many saw it as a way for farmers to circumvent higher wages and better working conditions that were being pushed for by American workers.
Your topic is going to dovetail so well into mine. Yeah.
So now we're getting to the end of the program, what happened, why it ended, and all of that. Despite its continuation for more than 20 years, the Bracero program came to an official end in 1964. Labor unions, civil rights organizations, and migrant worker advocates had been vocal in their criticism of the program for years. As the civil rights movement gained momentum, the poor treatment of braceros, combined with the growing labor movement, led to pressure to end the program. The Eisenhower administration, along with lawmakers and activists, began to push for immigration reform that would protect migrant workers more effectively. The program, as I said, officially ended in 1964, but of course, the issue of labor migration hasn't really gone away. The Bracero program left a complex legacy. On one hand, it helped shape U.S.-Mexico relations for decades, establishing a pattern of labor migration that continued long after the program's end. On the other hand, it revealed deep flaws in how the U.S. treated migrant workers. Clearly, the program had a significant impact on the U.S., its economy, especially during and after World War II, which was the whole point, why it was started. It helped maintain food production and support the U.S. infrastructure, but it also, like I said, revealed a darker side of immigration policies, including exploitation and discrimination and the lack of rights for migrant workers. The legacy of the Bracero program can still be felt today. modern guest worker programs like the H-2A visa for agricultural laborers continue to shape immigration policy. And the stories of the Braceros remind us of the ongoing struggles faced by migrant workers who are still often treated as disposable labor. So that's it. That's my topic.
Wow, I didn't know about that. What was the main reason that people didn't like it?
I mean, I can answer that two different ways. American workers didn't like it because they were thinking, this is just a way for bosses, or for whatever you want to call it, to work around the demands that they were making. And at the time, I'm sure they were wanting to unionize, and basically they saw it as a way to undermine their own rights of American laborers.
Right.
Immigrants' rights advocates didn't like the Bracero program because of the other side of things, which is that they weren't treated fairly, their wages weren't what were promised, their living conditions were terrible, and so it was bad in two different ways, I guess.
So it was basically a program to bring Mexicans over to do manual labor, but it didn't guarantee, or it did not effectively guarantee any quality of life, payment around, participating in this program.
Well, I'm sure in the beginning lots was promised, and I think this is also just now me speaking from my lived experiences, and what I have seen is as an immigrant coming to the US, you're promised the world, and I could see it. I'd actually be really interested to look into this topic from the Mexican history perspective. Obviously I'm looking at it now through an American lens because it's an American program. It was created in the US, but I'd be curious to see how it was perceived, or what was the sentiment about it in Mexico when it was happening, because I do think that, not anymore, but the US for a long time had great PR. Everybody thought they were going to move here and they were going to be rich and they were going to live the quote unquote American dream. And so I wouldn't be surprised if from, the Mexican perspective back in the day when it was starting, it was oh my God, this is it. This is the way to get over there and do it right, quote unquote, because I'm doing it through a program where they're seeking me out to be a worker and I can come to this country and have more opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's what always is there's so many things about this that are sad, or that can make me feel a little disillusioned, because all people want to do was come work, and provide find a better life for themselves, in turn provide a service to the community and to this country that they aspired to live in, that they thought was the best country in the world, and leave their hometown, leave their home country and their families, and to pursue what they thought was better, better opportunities. And I'm not going to say it wasn't. For a lot of people it is, and it continues to be. Coming to the US, it can change your scenario in very positive ways also, of course, but it sucks that they were met with false promises. And even though I'm sure it wasn't the case for everyone, I don't think obviously this is all overarching history and the perception of the program at the time when it started and when it ended. But I'm sure people, had success going through it, but it sucks that it all in all ended up not being so great. Okay, Joe, now I want to hear about your topic.
So my topic today is Dolores Huerta. So when people talk about the labor rights movement, and especially farmers, farm workers, and Mexican American workers, the first name that comes to mind is Cesar Chavez. But Dolores Huerta was also instrumental figure in this aspect of the history. So Dolores was born in 1930 on April 10th. She was born in Dawson, New Mexico, which was a mining town. Her father was a coal miner, and he belonged to the United Mine Workers Union. So he was very active in the union. When Dolores was 5, her parents divorced, and her mother took her to first Las Vegas, but then eventually to Stockton, California. She didn't see her father much after this point, but he continued to be a fiery, active union member and leader, and was eventually elected to the state legislature in New Mexico. So raising her mother had 2 jobs and was also active in her union. Dolores has described the neighborhood that she grew up in as racially integrated and diverse, but her school was segregated by both class and race. After high school, she went to college and got her teaching credentials, but she quit after just 1 year of teaching. In 1955, she meets a guy named Fred Ross, who was a founding member of the Community Service Organization. So this was a labor rights organization. So actually, she was weirded out by his sort of communist leanings, and she actually asked the FBI to do a background check on him, which sounds pretty wild to me. I can't imagine asking the FBI to background check someone for me.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
She must have thought it was really sus.
Yeah. After that, though, the FBI background check came out clean, so she felt okay getting involved with this organization. At the beginning, she mainly interacted with women's clubs, and there was a lot of like gender role stuff going on within the organization. But eventually, Fred Ross himself encouraged her to try to get more into leadership roles within the organization. And she did so. She became very active, and eventually she was founding new chapters. She became a lobbyist and was testifying before the California State Legislature in support of getting retirement benefits for non-citizens, health coverage for farm workers. She was actively opposed to the Bracero program. She was advocating for neighborhood improvement projects. She taught citizenship classes, and she worked on voter registration drives. So she was very active. She was doing lots of different programs to try to make things better all around. At this time, this is when she met Cesar Chavez for the first time. So in 1958, she founds the Agricultural Workers Association, but that didn't last long. It dissolved the next year, and then she became the secretary-treasurer of the Agricultural Workers Organization Committee, so AWOC. Eventually, she resigned from this group, though, because she became disenchanted with the group's leadership direction and its top-down policies. But she continued her work with the CSO. It was actually, she had a paid position with them. But eventually she becomes frustrated with the CSO too, because they weren't advocating enough for farm workers specifically. So then she and Cesar Chavez and another guy named Gilbert Padilla form a new organization called the National Farm Workers Association. And eventually she leaves CSO entirely and moves from Stockton down to Delano, California. And this is where the headquarters of the NFWA is established. At this time, she's no longer a paid employee of CSO, and so she's trying to, put together a living doing anything that she can. One of the biggest events in the history of their organization that they put together is the Delano Grape Strike. So in 1965, the AWOC, the organization she was a part of before, was organizing a strike specifically in the Coachella Valley. Both Mexican and Filipino farm workers in the Coachella Valley, working specifically with grapes, were not being treated fairly, not being paid well enough, and so AWOC helped them put together a strike, and it was successful in May of 1965. And so following this, AWOC started another strike in Delano. hoping to recreate this success for more grape farm workers. Very shortly after, like the next week, they reach out to the NFWA and ask them to join the strike, to help them put it together and to like help convince people to join this strike. And then they do. They agree. And they actually meet on September 16th with members of the community to discuss this. They convince Cesar Chavez to join the strike, to have the NFWA join the strike.
September 16, you say?
Indeed.
I have two fun facts about that date. The first is that is Mexican Independence Day. It is not Cinco de Mayo. Don't let them fool you. It's all marketing. You can also have a margarita on September 16 to celebrate Mexican Independence Day. The second fun fact is that it's also my birthday!
Woo!
Woo!
So at this time, Huerta is very actively helping organize this strike. So it's a strike against grapes, and basically there's two uses for grapes that are important here. You can turn them into wine, or there's what's called table grapes, and that's just when you eat grapes straight up. So they started boycotts against wine throughout California, and then eventually they expanded this to other parts of the country as well. So at first, she was trying to work with local unions in the New York, New Jersey area to get them to refuse to transport California grapes across the Hudson River. It turns out this is illegal, specifically because of the Taft-Hartley Act, which is a law that's still in the books today and is an anti-union law. And so instead she changes tactics and just expands the boycott to New Jersey and New York. And after this point, it really ends up spreading a lot to a lot of different parts of the country. This strike is going to last for a very long time, 5 years. So the next year after the strike starts, the NFWA, this being the organization that Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta started together, merges with AWOC, the organization that she previously left and helped start the strike. So they merged together into one organization now called the United Farm Workers. The UFW is the organization that you will most often hear attached to Cesar Chavez's name and his movement. Dolores was appointed the vice president of this new organization, and they also called her the union's first contract negotiator. So she was very active in the negotiation processes for the union moving forward. In 1968, so now 2 years after this, the strike is still going on, and Robert F. Kennedy is running for president, and he brings a lot of attention to the strike. So he actually goes and meets with Cesar Chavez, and so as a result, the UFW supports and campaigns for him for his campaign for president. As part of her duties as vice president of the union, Dolores Huerta attends his victory speech. I did not know exactly this piece of information about his life, but I did know that he was assassinated before he could become president. I didn't know that he was assassinated specifically at his victory speech for his primary campaign. So she was in attendance for the assassination itself. I want to read you this one quote from Dolores from a thing that she said when the strike was happening. "We are conscious today of the significance of our present quest. If this road we chart leads to the rights and reforms we demand, it leads to just wages, humane working conditions, protection from the misuse of pesticides, and to the fundamental right of collective bargaining. If it changes the social order that relegates us to the bottom reaches of society, then in our wake will follow thousands of American farm workers." So in 1970, the strike finally ends because the companies give in and agree to the demands of the union. They agree to give a contract to the workers. And in this contract, it guarantees a certain minimum wage for the workers. It comes along with scheduled pay increases over the next 2 years. It guarantees health and welfare benefits. The jobs are assigned through the union hiring hall. There is instituted a committee for regulating the pesticide use on the farms, and these committees contain both growers and union members. They also institute a formal grievance procedure, and as one of the guarantees that the union is giving to the employers, they agree to not have any more strikes for the next 3 years, for the next amount of time that this contract is in place. And so this is a huge win. This is a huge success because this is, as you were saying when you're talking about the Bracero program, this is a group of people who historically have not had rights, workers who have not had rights. It was an incredibly difficult thing that they managed to achieve.
This goes to illustrate something that's very obvious, and I think a lot of us know. But I'll say it just to say it.
Do it.
These kinds of advocacy groups are so important, and a lot of them don't always have the resources that they need in order to help the people that need help. One of the only good things that can come out of the things that are happening right now is the awareness that it creates for the importance of these kinds of advocacy groups. They exist in different ways, I think, now maybe than they did before, and also a lot of them back then were tied to like the civil rights movement and stuff, and obviously things are different now, but it doesn't mean that those groups don't exist still, and it doesn't mean that they don't need support.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I wanted to talk about your point about bringing awareness to these struggles, to the work that people are putting in towards these struggles. And that's one of the things that actually gives me hope in these times, is seeing how many people are going out, taking to the streets and taking direct action in the face of what's going on. And I think this too is a time to bring awareness to the sort of ongoing, continual efforts that people put in to advocate for rights and to try to make our society a little bit better. The UFW was a union, right? And so there's a lot of unions in this country, and there's a lot of jobs who the workers have put in the effort and unionized, have joined a union or have started their own union to collectivize their power to advocate for themselves and get better working conditions, get better pay, and not be pushed around so much by the bosses. The only way that we can demand things from the people in power is to collectivize our power. All of our little droplets can add up to a much bigger thing than what they have. Okay, but let me get off my soapbox and get back to the topic of Dolores. So after the Delano grape strike, she continues working and organizing for workers' rights. She continues working with the UFW, doing various things that you might expect. But I'll just jump ahead to 1988, when she's involved in a protest specifically against George H.W. Bush. And then at this protest, a cop beats her, pretty severely, like multiple broken ribs, and it's pretty bad. And at this time, she takes a break from the UFW just to heal at first, but she stays out of UFW specifically for several years until 1993 when Cesar Chavez dies. Then she rejoins. And I just bring this up because it'll be important as a marker in what I'll say next. I wanted to sort of go back and talk about her relationship to feminism because it's complicated. So the community that she's coming out of is very, very Catholic. It's a very religious community, and it's very conservative in a lot of ways. So I didn't mention at all her personal life yet, but during the whole time period of everything I described, she was married twice and divorced twice. Then she cohabitated with her, I guess, long-term partner, who is actually Cesar Chavez's brother. Altogether, she ended up having 11 kids. The UFW and all the people around it were very Catholic, and this religiousness played very much into the ideology of the movement. And one of the things that means in particular is that they were not fans of birth control or of abortion. Unexpectedly, they always supported gay marriage. She said that she felt that feminism was a middle-class phenomena. That's how she described it. So it seemed like, from her perspective, it wasn't really the most pressing issue. Her view was this wasn't really something you had time to worry about if you were not middle class, if you're poor. But she changes her tune later on in the 70s and the 80s in different interviews. She calls herself a feminist and describes how talking to feminists and learning more about this relieved her guilt about her divorces. And so after she takes a break from the UFW, she ends up working a lot with a group called the Feminist Majority Foundation. And this group is advocating for reproductive health and women's equality. She does a commercial for them where she is encouraging Latinas to run for office to increase their visibility within politics. She fights against anti-abortion laws. She supported many Democratic campaigns throughout the year, like many Democrats running for president. But she's also the honorary co-chair of the Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA, which is not, even though it has Democratic as the first word of the name, it is not affiliated with the Democratic Party at all. A super interesting fact about Dolores Huerta that I couldn't place into the timeline is that she actually invented the phrase "si se puede." So some historians say that Cesar Chavez is the one who invented it, but Cesar Chavez himself has actually said that Dolores Huerta invented it. And she has told the story of how she came to invent it herself in interviews. So I'll tell that. I'll read it in her own words now. We were in Arizona. We were organizing people in the community to come out to support us. They had passed a law in Arizona that said if you say boycott, you could go to prison for 6 months. If you say strike, you could go to prison. So we were trying to organize against that law, and I was speaking to a group of professionals in Arizona to see if they could support us. And they said, oh, here in Arizona, you can't do any of that. In Arizona, no se puede. No, you can't. And I said, no, in Arizona, sí se puede. And when I went back to our meeting that we had every night there, I gave the report to everyone. And when I said, sí se puede, everybody started shouting, sí se puede, sí se puede. And so that became the slogan of our campaign in Arizona. And now is the slogan for the immigrant rights movement, on posters. We can do it. I can do it. Sí se puede. And so obviously this ends up inspiring many people for decades, right? And in fact, Obama translates it to English but uses the same phrase, and he acknowledges that he took direct inspiration from sí se puede when he says yes we can. And he acknowledges this specifically in 2012 when he gives her the Presidential Medal of Freedom. So in 2014, there was a movie that came out called Cesar Chavez. It's a biopic about Cesar Chavez. It was actually directed by Diego Luna. Dolores Huerta was portrayed in the movie by Rosario Dawson. And I just noticed a funny coincidence that Dolores Huerta is from a town called Dawson, New Mexico. She was also the honorary co-chair of the Women's March in D.C. in 2017. And in 2018, the governor of California, Jerry Brown, declared her birthday, April 10th, to be Dolores Huerta Day. So that's it. That's what I had to say about Dolores Huerta.
Yeah, that was great. That was really interesting. I'm sure I must have learned about her when I was in school, but the emphasis, of course, is a lot more on Cesar Chavez. And so I think it's cool and important for us to remember that she was there too. She was part of it too. Not that people don't remember, but you know what I mean? I do think the focus tends usually to be him. And I think it's very cool that you have chosen that as your topic for the day. Because I will say, a little peek behind the curtain, I think I had suggested Cesar Chavez for your topic for today, but I'm glad you flipped it and reversed it on me and decided to do Dolores Huerta instead. I think that's very awesome.
To be honest, I didn't want to do a topic I felt like everyone had already heard in school at some point. I don't know if this is like a California specific thing, but I feel like I learned a lot about Cesar Chavez growing up.
It could be. I thought growing up it was specific to the area that I grew up in because I lived in a border city very close to a lot of farm worker land. And I remember Cesar Chavez coloring pages when I was in elementary school and stuff like that. So, but yeah, it might be a California specific thing. I don't know. Let us know if you are listening not from California.
Right.
Did you learn about Cesar Chavez?
Yeah. And I mean, even though I wasn't as close to Mexico as you were, I grew up in the Coachella Valley, which, I specifically mentioned in this story, right? That was one of the central locations of the beginnings of the grape strike. And yeah, I wanted to focus on specifically Dolores Huerta's work in this stuff that wasn't Cesar Chavez centric, right? It's easy to find that information. And I mean, it's easy to find this information too, but not as many people are talking about it as they are Cesar Chavez. So that I wanted to focus on that. And I also wanted to I also wanted to highlight now, sort of at the end, that it seems like the main differences between what Cesar Chavez contributed and what Dolores Huerta contributed to this movement, because they both obviously contributed important things, but they contributed very different things. So Cesar Chavez was very much the face of this movement. He was the public figure. He did the hunger strikes and all of that stuff. And he was the face, he was the voice, he was the one that people could see. And Dolores Huerta was more actively the organizer, more going out there and doing, getting things done, getting, going and organizing. She specifically went to New York and New Jersey and got people to start boycotting the California grapes from over there and wine from California.
I see your point and the differences, and I think this could open a whole other can of brain worms, if you will, about the sometimes invisible role of women in these kinds of movements, and also in life in general, of being the one in charge of more administrative tasks that keep things moving but aren't as exciting,
Mm-hmm.
but are just as important. And I think her work is a testament of how important that is, and how maybe it isn't always as celebrated as it should be.
Right, definitely.
Beyonce said it best. Who run the world? Girls.
Girls.
And women. And Dolores Huerta.
Mm-hmm.
And me. Just kidding. I run this house, though.
That's true. That's it for today's episode.
Thank you, as always, for listening. If you made it to the end, leave a comment. Leave a Spotify comment. Tell us what you thought of the episode. Put a fun little emoji, whatever it may be. I hope this was an educational distraction from the horrors of the world, and I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to take care of yourself.
Stay safe out there.
Drink your water, get some rest, and we'll be here waiting for you with a new episode. Make sure you're following us on Instagram. We're posting some fun reels over there. We're on Instagram at brainworms_pod. Anyway, thank you for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.
And as always, fuck ICE.